So Jess, I know you took yourself in your own business, from what I can understand is one of Australia's largest franchise groups. You took yourself from being a manager to a leader. And tell me about that time you got that award.
Yeah, I think back to that journey in our business that we were the number one business, which have been many times when I was in that business and still have been, and where I was up on stage and were the number one performing regional business at the time. But I wasn't super proud of the direction of the business was going, and so I felt like there was still a bit of turnover going on with no real process of bringing people in. And I was at the time probably doing 50% of the business sales and felt like there just had to be a better way. And I think sometimes I see businesses who get a bit too caught up into awards rather than having a structured business. And I think as a leader, that if you want to be able to start spending more time working on your business rather than in it, it's developing effective recruitment systems, effective systems that your team can clearly see around managing database and listings on the market, cultural programs we'll talk about a lot. And each piece links together and they're big pieces to get right. And I think as a leader, for me, that was something that I worked really hard on for a number of years, of building all those systems in place that allowed me to ease back from selling and bring other people into those roles. And I look back at that business, I was very proud when we got back to number one again for many years in a row. But that was when the business felt like it had something to stand for.
From a personal growth perspective, how did it make you feel from that moment of standing on stage, recognising that you didn't have these systems in place, you knew there was a better way to success, and then achieving that? Talk me through that little personal journey of yours.
Definitely a very rewarding part of it. I always ask a business leader a question when I sit down with them and first start working with them. So if you're a leader watching this now, I always say, I'm going to ask you a question. Where do you want to be inside your business in 3 to 5 years from today? And that was something that for me, I remember at that time when I knew there was a different destination I wanted to get to, I became very clear on what that needed to look like and what that needed to look like in 3 and 5 years. So I looked at this long point at the end game and looked at the pathway of what we needed to get there. And that was just through talking to great business leaders, doing lots of training, immersing myself in things that I knew the business had to do to get better in culture and systems. And then it was just one piece at a time. It was one system, recruitment, get that right. It was culture, get that right. And it was always like when I ask people that where you want to be in your business, then it's about saying how many hours per week are you spending working in your business as opposed to on it. Let's look at what that looks like today. And then if I come back and ask you that question in 12 months' time, I'd want you to give me a different answer. And it should be maybe going from 50-50, then a year later it might be 75-25. So think about that destination of where you want to be and then look at the amount of hours. And working in your business to me is simply listening and selling, and working on your business is working with your team one-on-one and coaching them and doing recruitment, working on culture and doing community initiatives. And for me, that was the most rewarding part. And I always say this about business leaders, and this was my experience as a leader at the time. If I asked my team when I felt like I was just a manager, if someone asked them externally and said, what do you think Jess stands for? They would say KPIs and managing our team that way. If you would ask them that same question maybe 3 to 5 years later, they would have said culture and community. That for me was really rewarding, where I could spend my time working more on that. And the business becomes so consistent and just got better year in, year out. And I think ultimately most leaders feel like they've got to be on the tools to earn great money. And for me, that wasn't my experience.
So you're clearly very good at systems thinking. Like that's obviously one of your genius zones, and hence why you've brought that into your coaching program. What about the extrovert out there that is a great sales leader, a great relationship builder, and perhaps not a systems thinker?
Really good question. And I remember working with a client exactly like this a few years ago, and I clearly identified that in the early stages of our working arrangement. We went to work and we brought someone into that role. And I think that is a very good question in terms of sometimes business leaders will try and do it all themselves and they're just not capable of it. And so it's part of what we do inside our mentoring program is take people through a bit of an assessment process and look at their own skills and where they want to spend their time. And that question I said, where do you want to be in 3 to 5 years from today? Sometimes people say, I still want to listen and sell. There's no right or wrong here. But then ultimately it's about maybe making that investment to bring other people into this role. Many of our clients do that. And then ultimately I have a couple of clients we work with, and I love working with these types of people where the principal still listens sells, and we work with other people on the ground around systems and process and implementation. And I see those businesses really thrive a lot quicker because there's clear people in different roles, there's people not multitasking, and there's clear delegation lines. That's a big thing to get right.
It sounds like there's a lot of different roles going on in there. Yes. Is there a certain agency size that works best for the system that you teach in your coaching program?
No, people ask me that a lot. There's 2 ways to look at it. I always say to business leaders, the big mistake you can make is looking at a really successful business and asking them what they're doing now when your business is not there. The question you shouldn't be asking is, what are you doing now? The question is, what did you do to get there? So the answer to your question is, we work with all different sizes of businesses, but if a smaller business comes to us, we take them through a different level of our program. We take them through some steps that they've got to get through first, because I know from experience that if I have a client come in and they try to work on, for example, a high performance cultural program when they haven't got database and stock management systems in place, they're just not going to work. So we make sure we have these 8 pillars that we take them through first. We have a traffic light system we measure them on, and we've got to get them through that before they start in step 2, where other clients, they're bigger businesses who might have 30 or 40 team members, will typically go straight into the other part of our program where they can work on, because they've mastered the other part first. So I think that's a really big thing for me when I see leaders who can't see past 12 months because they just haven't got clear on the basic system to run a business initially.
It sounds like because there's so many great markers in the roadmap, no matter what size your business is, does that mean that you can kind of somewhat guarantee results for people when they come and work with you in the program, or are they guaranteeing their own results by the structures you give them?
Great question again. I think early days as a coach when I started this many years ago, it was probably people just come in and pick a few things off and do what they needed to do, and they would say to me, well, I feel like I need this in my business, so I'd give it to them. And what I've learned over many years in this industry, in the coaching piece that I do, is that I actually hold people off from doing that. And I learned that making sure that we can do an assessment, really find out where the work needs to be done early on, not what the people think they need, and holding them back from that. And I always say to people that in the initial part of our working arrangement, it's making sure we're a great fit to work together. And more so for me, it's that part of making sure that they don't want to work on things that are too far advanced for them at that point in time. So I think that's a big part. And success, if they follow the program or the steps they need to go through, ultimately they'll get there. I think sometimes people, when they try to take on too much or they try and do something and they're not ready for, is where things fall down.
In your experience, if you've got an extroverted leader that loves listing and selling, because I think that's who we're talking to right now, what would you tell them? How would you start them off? What would be the first step?
Well, the first step is asking them the question where they want to be.
Yep.
That's my clear destination. Where do you want to be in 3 to 5 years from today? And when I work out what that looks like, then we can start to go to work from there. And then the next question for me is, we look at the initial part of our programs. I want to do initial assessment, where things are at with that. If we find that that's in place, then we'll work on another avenue. So I think that clear lines of destination for me is a really big one. But I think the other part sometimes with those extrovert-based selling principles that you mentioned is sometimes I've learnt over the journey that they've got to be invested into coaching as well. I've seen a lot of businesses I've worked with, or they'll bring me in or bring a coach in. They just want to keep listening and selling, and they've got no interest in someone like me being there. And what I've learnt is early days, I'll say that's okay. You want us to keep listening and selling, but we have to be involved in this as a working partnership together. Because ultimately, if I'm teaching someone a piece of our content or part of our program, but then you're sending a different message when I'm not there, it's just not going to work. So we all need to be on the same page. For those extrovert-based people was a really critical part, because they might be great what they do. They might be what I call a natural or Gary Ablett, I say a lot in people's businesses. But ultimately, your salespeople probably need, who aren't successful as you as that extrovert leader, they need a system to follow, and they need to understand what that looks like. And I've seen that back in my business some years ago, that everyone needs that platform that they can follow and they can easily see the pathway to that.
Excellent. Thanks so much for your time.